Okay, guys, I know that arguments in this life will never completely cease, but I have a scriptural point today that in theory should put to rest the debate about can Christians celebrate Easter, can Christians celebrate Christmas. And just before we get started, I want to start off by saying Christmas trees, stockings, the Easter bunny, painting eggs, all of these different things, Santa Claus, lying to your kids about Santa Claus and where Christmas presents come from, I believe that's pagan. My family, we do not celebrate that. I don't believe that is something that is pleasing to God, really whatsoever. So I'm totally with you on that. But I wanted to bring to your attention today that Jesus Christ celebrated Hanukkah in John chapter 10. Now, at first, that might not seem significant to you, but let me ask you the question. Where in the Old Testament or the New Testament, where anywhere in Scripture, did the Father, did the one true God, command the celebration of Hanukkah? You will not find a single place, but yet Jesus Christ celebrated Hanukkah. Hanukkah, or the Festival of Lights, or the Feast of Dedications, as it talks about in Scripture, was actually not implemented until after the Old Testament Scripture had been finished writing. It was actually about 150, 160 years before Jesus Christ came on this earth. And essentially Hanukkah is the celebration of the rededication of the temple land and Jerusalem being reclaimed by the Hebrews a second time when they were liberated out of captivity. John chapter 10 verse 22 says, "Now it was the feast of dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter." So that's the same time that Hanukkah is still celebrated today. And another holiday that we're going to talk about, obviously, Christmas is celebrated at that same time. So an interesting parallel. So it was celebrated in winter, and Jesus walked into the temple, Solomon's porch. Another translation puts it like this, just straightforward in saying that it's Hanukkah. It was now winter, and Jesus was in Jerusalem at the time of Hanukkah, the festival of dedications. Now, that's obviously undeniably the case, that it was the time of Hanukkah, this is what was being celebrated. But once again, I'll ask you the question, at what point in the Old Testament was it commanded of God to celebrate Hanukkah? Nowhere, but yet Jesus Christ celebrated it. Now, some might make the argument that, oh no, he didn't celebrate it. But I wanted to read to you guys John chapter 8, just going back 2 chapters earlier, not too far. Verse 12 says, "Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." Now, as I mentioned earlier, Hanukkah can also be referred to as the Festival of Lights. I believe when Jesus Christ was walking into Solomon's porch, he was showing them that he is the light of the world. This is, very interesting how Jesus just made this statement in John chapter 8 that he's the light of the world. And undoubtedly, that would be what is being implied. So I believe there's actually, very much significance to the fact that Jesus went and celebrated Hanukkah. Now, what did Jesus Christ not do when he went into the temple? He didn't say, you guys are celebrating a pagan, man-made holiday. You guys are celebrating a holiday that was never commanded in Scripture. No, there's no negative association with Jesus Christ in the Scripture with regards to the celebration of Hanukkah. Now, obviously, Jesus got into debate or was contending for the faith, you could say, in this chapter later on in John chapter 10 with those who are hard-hearted, with those who are resistant to the gospel. But I think that's a different point. But I hope you guys realize how significant this is. Once again, so many people that are very dogmatic about you can't celebrate Christmas, you can't celebrate Easter, and make it like an utterly fundamental thing about the faith, will say that, Easter and Christmas were never commanded by God in the Scripture. There's no scriptural point for this. But I would bring to your attention, when was it commanded whatsoever to celebrate Hanukkah in the Old Testament? Now, you could draw parallels of some things that were done in Hanukkah with regards to the lamp being lit, right? That was obviously commanded in Old Testament Scripture. But I think to therefore say, like, that's a similar thing as some of the Old Testament commands regarding the temple in general is definitely not a valid point to be made. This is a specific holiday, commemorating the fact that the temple had been dedicated again. The temple had been reclaimed again. So I just want to make it clear once again, I totally don't believe in putting a tree in your house and putting these weird objects and relics on it and, all these different traditions that people have come up with regards to Christmas and Easter. And I do believe that it does essentially line up with a pagan worldview concerning fertility to paint Easter eggs. That's totally not of God. But what I want to bring to your attention today is, how can you say it is not of God, it is unscriptural to celebrate Jesus Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ in a scriptural, God-honoring way, if Jesus Christ celebrated Hanukkah? I know this is kind of a different point, but I know there's going to be some people down in the comment section of this video making this an utterly dogmatic thing. Hey, I'm not here to say you should celebrate Christmas or not. I'm not here to say you necessarily have to celebrate Easter or not, or whether you want to call it Resurrection Day. I'm just trying to say, I'm not trying to make one point or the other of what you should do in this situation. I'm just trying to say, this puts the debate to rest. This makes it so you can't be dogmatic and saying, no, you can't celebrate Christmas, that's not in Scripture. Well, Jesus celebrated Hanukkah. And obviously, you can't dogmatically push Christmas or Easter either way. So the fact that Jesus Christ celebrated Hanukkah, and he went in there with the Hebrews, he went in there in the temple, and there wasn't any negative association with that holiday. Actually, it says right here that he was in Solomon's porch, right? He wasn't rebuking them for celebrating the holiday. So how can you be so dogmatic and religious to act like people aren't even Christians if they celebrate the Lord's birth or the Lord's resurrection? And I know this is kind of a different point as well too, but for those who become very dogmatic about not celebrating Christmas or Easter, some of them might just have a very firm opinion or be religious, but most of them are subtly pushing a Hebrew roots type like movement. And they'll say that Easter is the same word as a false god named Ishtar, and that's how you pronounce it in English. And it comes back to what I've talked about before, guys. This paranoia about English, this, association of words with meaning inherent things about false gods that were talked about 3,000 years ago in a completely different language. Guys, I want to tell you, you don't have to speak Hebrew to be a thorough follower of Jesus Christ. You don't have to avoid eating pork and unclean foods. You don't have to keep the Sabbath day. Actually, the New Testament's very clear about this, that one esteems a day as holy, and the other person esteems every day as like the same. So guys, I don't know what your perception of what this video is going to be like, but my point is this. This can settle the debate. You can't be dogmatic about this topic when Jesus Christ celebrated Hanukkah, because that was never commanded in the Old Testament. So don't go around, being dogmatic about this whole topic. Okay, something like Halloween, that is inherently pagan. You are inherently doing pagan rituals, but you can celebrate the Lord's birth if you want to. You can celebrate the Lord's death, burial, and resurrection. Actually, you kind of have to in some sense as a Christian. Okay, so thank you guys for hearing me out. God bless you.